Thank you for the introduction. I agree to everything that has been said before about the critical importance at local level. That water is a local issue, but I pull you out of this for the next 10 minutes and we'll speak a little bit about more the global analysis we are doing. I will speak about lessons learned from the recently published United Nations synthesis report on SDG 6. It's about the global water agenda. The SDGs are really an exciting agenda in itself, and it's sometimes fascinating to what the heads of state actually agree to if you look at all these 17 goals and the ambitious goals that have been formulated there. One of these goals is on SDG 6. To summarize that, where are we with SDG 6? How does SDG 6, the water and sanitation goal, how does it link to all the others? And what are the key policy recommendations? We launched in New York at the high-level political forum in July a report describing all that. And I just would like to share 4 or 5 messages what I believe for this audience might be interesting. So this is the published report, and I really would like to stress I had the pleasure and headache to coordinate that effort over the last 2 years, but there's quite a number of other institutions who contributed a lot, so I'm really presenting the result of a collective effort. Message 1. Achieving the water goal, is absolutely essential to achieve all the others. Is it the food security goal, reducing poverty, economic growth, gender equality, etc., etc. So water is really absolutely critical to making progress in the others and vice versa. You also need progress in the other goals to actually achieve the water goal. These interdependencies, though to some extent they are in every hydrology and water resources textbook, are absolutely critical to understand. I know you can't read all these facts who are on this slide here, but we tried for every goal just to pick out one of the key facts that we describe in this report, demonstrating the critical interdependencies. Second message, inequalities. They are an all-time high. While we have been making progress in many directions, inequalities are increasing. What we plotted here is the GDP versus the national population having access to safe drinking water. Every country is a bubble. The bigger the bubble, the larger the population. And you see here, the higher the GDP, the larger the access to water. And you can plot many other parameters here on the y-axis, and you always see more or less the same pattern. Inequalities also, let me briefly speak about safe drinking water or drinking water in general. This is the safely managed drinking water. While 71% of the population have access to at least basic drinking water, you see the problem areas in yellow and orange in this part. And there are still, 844 million people having not access to at least basic water. More than 2 billion having not access to safely managed drinking water, with all the health implications connected to that. Yeah, if you look safely managed, you come up this map, and I show it just because there's a lot of gray, which indicates gray, not efficient data. Sometimes we don't have data, or data is not accessible, and it also demonstrates the challenges we have in putting these global reports together. Speaking about inequalities, it's still largely the women or the girls, but mainly the women who are responsible for household water management. And you see here different countries, South Sudan, Mozambique, and Burkina Faso, etc., etc. And you see, is it the man or the women who is responsible for collecting water, managing it? And it's largely the women that kind of deprives them having access to do other income-generating business. Inequalities, just now moving on to sanitation. A lot of these mold maps show a country color. It's blue or green or red or whatever. But if you look at one area, let me look at sanitation. Worldwide, we have 70% basic sanitation. If you look Latin America and Caribbean, you find everything between 30% and 100%. Look at Panama, a largely industrialized Latin American country. On average, it's some 80%. But you find everything between 30 and 100%. And there's a huge difference between the rural and the urban and the rich and the poor and the different municipalities. So having a value per country is not informing very well what the situation is. So it's all about the sub-national inequalities and diversity. And it's still more than 2 billion people waiting access to a toilet, waiting access to at least basic sanitation. Some almost 900 million people have to practice open defecation. They have not access at all to any sanitation facility. And you see while this has been decreasing over the last 15 years during this so-called Millennium Development Goals period, you see a really decrease, particularly in Northern Western Africa, that's here, but also Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where the biggest problem of open defecation is. But if you continue this linearly for the next years, we will not end it by 2030, though there will still people not having access, and open defecation will remain, and particularly in rural areas. So we really have to speed up, and that's maybe the second message. It's time to act now. With the current speed of progress, we will not achieve the SDGs. Yeah? This is true for open defecation, it's true for water supply and sanitation. If you look at basic water, only 1 out of 5 countries is on track to achieve basic sanitation in 2030. Only 1 out of 10 countries is on track achieving basic sanitation. So really, we need to reinforce the efforts. We need to speed up and accelerate achieving this agenda. I skipped this in the interest of time. Quickly about global water users. You have seen this has been escalating over the last decades. Globally, roughly 70% of the water is used for agriculture, some 20% is for industry and energy production, and only some 11-12% go actually to the domestic use. So drinking less water doesn't help much with saving the water crisis. No, it's really about the other uses of water. And while having this 69 or 70% of water used for agriculture globally, and some bit less than 20% for industry and energy, it's important to also look at this. How is that in the different continents? And what we see here in Europe, it's only 21% of the total withdrawals used for agriculture, but it's largely industry. So more efficiency there, larger reuse there, in particular in highly industrial areas, is making a lot of water available for other purposes. In other continents, it's more than 80%. Some agricultural-based economies, more than 90% of the water goes into agriculture. Yeah? And also some parts of Spain, but the experts are sitting here, it's a very, very significant part. So I'm not saying only saving water in industry is important in Europe, but it's really looking at the local circumstances. And there's a huge technology developments and savings. I think authors in the morning refer to this. And Gonzalo told me yesterday he has friends when we were standing at the Spanish tapas. We were enjoying this being here, and from their cell phone they manipulate the irrigation scheme in their country in their farm, and it's able. Technology is there to really do that much more efficiently in the long run. How actually that results into saving, we can discuss during the discussion. Let me jump to my last point. I know I'm a bit late in time, and that's about financing, because I'm not an economist. There are 2 economists speaking after me, and just to lay a little bit the ground based on that report that we recently published, and thanks to the contribution of the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank inputs to this, it needs a paradigm shift. I think that is very clear. The current way of financing is insufficient. There's different numbers floating around, and I'm going to listen very carefully to the next speakers, what they have to offer. But the World Bank was estimating that annually it's about 114 billion, but only to meet the WASH target, so target 6.1 and 6.2. But this is even without operation and maintenance costs. So the real financial requirements is much higher than the 114 billion. And that does not even include all the other SDGs related to ecosystems, integrated water resources management, water quality, ambient water quality, etc., etc. Last slide on this. So what water is needed for that so-called paradigm shift? I was alluding already on the difficulties to estimate a good number. The total costs were estimated to some 500 billion, but again, it's very difficult to say that globally. Interesting is that ODA alone cannot be the solution, speaking now for the developing country context here. Globally, we observe that it's stayed stable around 5%, roughly, the part of the ODA that is dispersed for water-related target. 8 commitments have been slightly increasing, but in some areas even declining, as for instance in Sub-Saharan Africa. So ODA alone cannot be the solution. It's a lot about domestic financing as well. Important is to say that an analysis from the GLASS report showed with some 104 countries or so that more than 80% of the participating countries say we have insufficient financing to meet our WASH target. So it really needs a boost in that sector. While still quite a large number of countries actually have to transfer funding from one year to the next because of not being able to implement it to all sorts of reasons which we can discuss. So what needs to happen? I would like to offer you 4 messages here. First, fully utilize most effectively existing financial resources. There is a lot of financial resources. Some are transferred from year to year because of the lack of bankable projects. Second, consider also the full socioeconomic value that can be generated through these investments. UNICEF published this number of the multiplier of 5. So every dollar you invest into water supply and sanitation is a larger macroeconomic benefit, pays back in the factor of 5. Obviously that varies from country to country, but that's very significant. And that's what often is forgotten if we have a too shortcut financial model. It really needs a more comprehensive assessment. What are these investments result in? Number 3, we need to create an enabling environment that investments from other sectors come, like maybe the national investments. Has a lot to do with the risk management. Obviously, water infrastructure investments need a lot of upfront capital investment at the beginning, then a very long payback period, sometimes over many decades. If there is instabilities or fragile states, there's a lot of hesitation to invest there. Though therefore, different players, particularly also the country, maybe have to help to pay off that risk of the investment, and that will also then creating that enabling environment, often connected to critical reforms in countries, to make it attractive to attract repayable finances from commercial financial sectors. So at the end, it's about blended financing, and I'll hand over to Wipke in a minute. It's about in the local context, probably the best mix of financial resources to make it most effective. This report is still out for a public discussion while we launched it at the HLPF in July. If you have comments, there's a website where you can also help us in providing your feedback and helping us to pitch the report and the future reports on this in the future in the right context. It's still a moderated open discussion till the end of this week. And I would like to thank you for your attention.